The dawn broke over Hawthorne Estate with a pall of muted gold, its light filtering through rain clouds that had sprawled across the sky like a morning veil. The grounds, usually so meticulously kept, glistened under the residue of a night storm. Each blade of grass bowed with the weight of raindrops, each rose shivering in the chilled breeze. It was a morning that seemed determined to match the condition of the man who walked its paths, a man whispered about in every London drawing room. Adrian, Duke of Wexford, the widower who no longer smiled. He moved through the estate gardens with the bearing of someone born into command, yet carrying a grief that bent him in ways no enemy on the battlefield ever had. His boots pressed into the softened earth, leaving imperfect footprints behind him, as though even the ground struggled to hold him. His dark coat, tailored with the severity of military discipline, absorbed the surrounding gloom. He had risen early, not from duty, but from the restlessness that clawed at him each morning, a restlessness born of too much silence, too many empty rooms, and an unrelenting awareness that the world expected him to remarry. He loathed that expectation. He loathed the way society speculated on his heart, like it was a horse they might wager on. They said he had grown cold, that he no longer felt anything. They said no woman would dare attempt to thaw him. He had heard enough of their mutterings to know that even his sorrow had become public entertainment. But that morning, as he rounded the corner toward the winter garden, a glass sanctuary his late wife had once adored, he heard something far crueler than the usual idle talk. Within the gazebo nearby, sheltered from the wind, a cluster of aristocrats conversed in low, satisfied tones. They had not seen him approach, and he doubted they would have cared if they had. The Duke of Wexford was a story to them, not a man. "I suppose he realizes time is running short," one woman murmured, her fan flicking open with a crisp snap. "A duke without an heir is a tragedy of poor management." "A tragedy of temperament, I should think," another replied with a soft, conspiratorial laugh. "He is too brooding. Who would marry a ghost?" A gentleman chimed in with careless cruelty. "Perhaps he avoids women because he fears they might see how broken he is." Broken. The word settled over him like an icy hand. He paused, shoulders stiffening, breath tightening in a way that made him feel briefly unmoored. They spoke of his demons as if they were trifles. They spoke of his grief as if it had been an inconvenience to them personally. The murmuring continued, each remark like another stone added to the weight he carried. He turned away, unable to listen further. Retreating into the winter garden, he pushed open the glass door and stepped inside, letting the warmth of the enclosed space wrap around him, though it did little to thaw the ache beneath his ribs. The glass walls, streaked with lingering condensation, reflected his expression back at him in watery distortions, an aristocrat with haunted eyes and a jaw clenched too tightly. He exhaled a fractured breath and braced his hands against a marble bench, bowing his head. For a moment he allowed himself to feel it, the exhaustion, the endless scrutiny, the hollowed-out places inside him that he feared would never be filled again. He did not weep, not quite, but the sting behind his eyes betrayed how near he was to breaking. A small sound behind him startled him, a soft scuffle, too light to be an adult step. He straightened, turning slowly, and found himself looking at a little boy no older than 6. The child had slipped inside unnoticed, his boots muddied, his hair rumpled, his cheeks flushed from the cold. He held something clutched in both hands, a wooden toy horse, missing one leg. The Duke blinked, unsure how long the child had been watching, but the boy stared with earnest concern. He approached with the same tentative bravery of a sparrow hopping toward a larger creature. "Sir," the boy whispered, voice quivering like a plucked string. "Are you hurt?" The Duke swallowed. "No," he said softly, feeling oddly exposed under the child's gaze. "I am quite well." "You look sad," the boy said with frank, disarming honesty. Then, catching sight of the Duke's expression, his small features creased in worry. He stepped closer, holding out the broken toy with a trembling hand, as though making an offering to a wounded king. "Don't cry, sir. You can have my mama. She makes everything better." The word struck him with an impact nothing in his adult world had managed for years. They came without pretense, without expectation, without judgment. The boy was simply trying to mend what he believed was broken. For a moment Adrian had no reply, stunned not by the suggestion itself, but by the purity of the child's compassion. Before he could speak, a woman appeared in the doorway, breathless and clearly searching. She froze the instant she saw the Duke, her gloved hand tightening around the doorframe. Her son ran to her immediately, clutching her skirts with the instinct of a child seeking protection. She was young, not in years alone, but in the gentle resilience of her posture. Her hair, gathered neatly at the nape of her neck, framed a face marked by quiet dignity. The fabric of her gown was modest, the attire of a governess rather than a lady of rank. Yet there was something unmistakably composed about her, something that did not waver even in the presence of a duke. "My deepest apologies, Your Grace," she said, voice steady though her cheeks colored with embarrassment. "My son meant no offense." "None was taken," Adrian replied, more quickly than he intended. His gaze lingered on her, a moment too long for propriety, yet he could not seem to help it. Something about the gentleness in her eyes unsettled the walls he had built within himself. She coaxed her son toward the exit, murmuring reassurances. The boy looked back, regretful, as if worried he had failed in his attempt to comfort the stranger in the garden. The woman's hand rested lightly on the child's shoulder as she led him away, her steps careful, her posture respectful, her presence unexpectedly compelling. Just before she passed through the doorway, the Duke managed to speak. "Madam," he said quietly. She paused, turning with composed humility. He felt the foolishness of the question even as it left his tongue, yet it pressed from his chest with the force of something fated. "Who is she?" he asked, eyes on the boy but meaning her. The governess hesitated, uncertain if she was permitted to answer. Then, with a small, graceful nod, she said, "Evelyn Haraway, Your Grace." Her name lingered in the air long after she disappeared from the garden. The Duke remained where he stood, watching the place where she had been. At his feet, the broken wooden horse lay forgotten, its missing leg a quiet testament to the strange and unexpected beginning of something he could not yet comprehend. The winter garden seemed to hold its breath around him, the glass walls trembling softly in the wind, as though the estate itself sensed that the loneliness gripping its master had just shifted by the simplest, most innocent words of a child. The morning after the encounter in the winter garden, Hawthorne Estate carried an unusual stillness, as if the air itself anticipated the ripple caused by a child's simple mercy. Yet nothing outwardly had changed. Servants hurried through corridors with polished silver trays, footmen rolled out carpets for arriving guests, and visiting aristocrats inspected the grounds with a proprietary air. Only one person walked with the demeanor of a man unsettled, the Duke of Wexford. His thoughts returned persistently to the small boy's trembling voice and the composed dignity of the governess, who had appeared like a quiet revelation. He tried to reason with himself that it was a trivial moment, an interruption of routine, but some part of him could not dismiss it. That afternoon, while reviewing estate accounts in his study, he found his mind overtaken by the image of the broken toy horse left behind on the marble floor. He could recall its chipped paint, the worn edges that showed years of use, and the way the missing leg seemed symbolic of a life patched together with limited means. The child, bright-eyed and earnest, had clung to it despite its damage, and that unguarded generosity, the offering of the toy, the offering of his mother, had shaken the Duke in a way that the most elaborate aristocratic gesture never could. Unable to ignore the persistent ache of the memory, he rose from his desk and rang for his steward. Mr. Aldway, a man whose discretion had steered the estate for decades, entered quietly. "Your Grace, there is an object in the winter garden," the Duke said, his tone deliberately neutral. "A wooden horse, broken. Bring it to me." A flicker of puzzlement crossed the steward's features, but he bowed. "At once, Your Grace." When the toy was placed in his hands, something softened inside him. It was small, carved with surprising care despite its simplicity. The missing leg had broken cleanly, suggesting rough handling or the exuberance of childhood play. The Duke examined it with a deliberateness he did not fully understand. "Send this to the woodworker in town," he instructed, "the one who mended the antique chaise for the Blue Salon. Tell him I require the repair to be perfect." "Yes, Your Grace." He gave no explanation, and Aldway, wisely, did not request one. But word of the Duke's unusual commission reached the servants' quarters within an hour, and speculation fluttered among maids and footmen like startled birds. The Duke rarely interfered in domestic matters, particularly those involving children. That he would take interest in a governess's child's toy was unprecedented. 2 days later, the repaired horse returned to the estate, polished, whole, and wrapped in plain parchment. The Duke held it for a moment, astonished that something so small could stir an unfamiliar warmth beneath the armor of his isolation. But he did not wish to embarrass the child or his mother by presenting it personally. He instructed Aldway to return it discreetly to the schoolroom where the governess taught lessons. Evelyn discovered it late in the afternoon. Her son gasped with delight at the sight, lifting the toy as though it had transformed into some magnificent treasure. She examined the workmanship, the careful restoration, the gleaming varnish, and immediately understood who had arranged it. Her heart tightened. Gratitude, tempered by apprehension, washed over her. She had worked in many houses since her late husband's passing, and she knew the dangers of attracting a nobleman's attention. Even innocent gestures could be twisted by rumor into something damning. And yet, she could not deny that the Duke's kindness felt strangely personal, a gesture rooted not in condescension but in empathy. She tucked the toy close to her chest, uncertain whether to fear or welcome the resonance of it. By evening, whispers had already begun to weave through the corridors. The ladies visiting the estate had noticed how the Duke's gaze lingered on the schoolroom windows during their afternoon stroll. Some chuckled, dismissing the notion with ridicule. Others narrowed their eyes with calculating interest. A Duke in need of an heir was a valuable prize, and many had come hoping to secure his regard. At supper, the dining hall glittered with candlelight and crystal. Evelyn was not present. Governesses did not dine with nobility, but she felt the weight of every whisper through the walls, each rumor tightening the invisible noose around her station. The Duke sat at the head of the table, jaw set, posture forbidding, yet he participated little in the conversation. It was clear his mind was elsewhere. One guest, Lady Bexford, attempted to draw him out. "Your Grace," she purred. "I could not help but notice your attention seemed occupied today." "Occupied," he repeated with cool politeness. "Yes," she said lightly. "One might think you were studying the schoolroom more intently than the gardens." His fork paused midair. A muscle in his jaw twitched, the smallest sign, yet enough to silence the entire table. "I observe much on my own estate, Lady Bexford," he replied, his tone edged with steel. "It would be wise not to misinterpret my glances." The conversation withered instantly. Evelyn, in her modest chamber above the nursery, felt a faint tremor of tension in the air, but could not know its cause. She spent the evening mending her son's shirts while he played quietly with his restored toy. She caught him staring at it with reverence. "Do you like it so very much?" she asked softly. He nodded, eyes shining. "It's the nicest thing anyone ever gave me. Mama, do you think the sad man fixed it?" Her breath caught. The image of the Duke in the winter garden, haunted and trying so hard to remain composed, flashed through her mind. She pushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "Perhaps," she said gently, "but we must not presume. Nor must we speak of it to anyone." The boy nodded solemnly, sensing her caution even if he did not fully understand it. The following afternoon, Evelyn led the children through the south corridor toward the main staircase. A reception for visiting families was underway in the ballroom below, the music carrying faintly through the walls. She kept the children close, reminding them of decorum. Yet fate, indifferent to propriety, intervened. As they descended the staircase, her foot slipped on a patch of wax left by a careless servant. The world tilted. She felt herself falling, and then strong hands caught her with decisive speed. Gasps erupted from below. Evelyn looked up and found the Duke holding her, his expression taut with concern. "Are you injured?" he asked, voice low enough that only she could hear. "No, Your Grace." "Thank you." Her cheeks burned as he helped her regain her balance. Every eye in the ballroom was fixed upon them. Fans fluttered, whispers multiplied, and a murmur of scandal swelled through the gilded room. The moment lingered a fraction too long, just long enough to be misinterpreted by those who desired precisely such a spectacle. He released her gently, but not before leaning closer with a quiet conviction that made her pulse race. "I shall not apologize for catching you." She inhaled sharply. The words held far more weight than mere politeness. Evelyn managed a small curtsy and guided the children away, her heart hammering. Behind her, the buzz of gossip thickened like storm clouds. She knew the story would spread before nightfall, perhaps even grow twisted beyond recognition, and she feared consequences she could not yet name. That evening, as she tucked her son into bed, a folded note was delivered to her chamber. It bore the Duke's seal. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The message was brief, the handwriting elegant and unmistakably his. "Your presence is requested in the library at 8 o'clock. Her stomach tightened. Summons from a duke seldom bode well for governesses. She stared at the letter, sensing that this was a turning point, one that might either ruin or redefine her entire existence. Night settled over Hawthorne Estate, with a hush so complete it seemed the walls themselves had agreed to keep whatever would occur within them a secret. The lamps along the corridor flickered gently as Evelyn made her way toward the library, her steps slow, her breath wound tight in her chest. She had dressed with deliberate modesty, choosing a simple gray gown with no adornment, hoping its plainness might shield her from misinterpretation. Yet no amount of modest fabric could silence the apprehension that curled through her thoughts. A summons at such an hour was unusual, even improper, and she knew the risk of appearing alone with a duke was not a trivial matter. Still, she could not refuse. When she reached the library door, she hesitated, her fingers hovering above the carved handle. Light glowed beneath the threshold, warm and steady, and she could hear the faint crackle of the fire within. She drew a breath, lifted her chin, and entered. The Duke stood near the hearth, the glow of the flames casting his features in striking relief. His dark hair gleamed like polished obsidian, and his expression bore attention she had seen only once, on the morning he believed himself alone in the winter garden. He turned as she stepped inside, and though his posture remained composed, something in his gaze shifted the moment it landed upon her. "Miss Haraway," he said, voice low, resonant, and unexpectedly gentle. "Thank you for coming." She curtsied, keeping her eyes demurely lowered. "Your Grace, if this concerns the incident earlier today, I assure you I meant no impropriety. My misstep was due to carelessness alone." He moved a little closer. "I did not summon you to chastise you." Her heart beat faster at the sincerity in his tone. She lifted her gaze cautiously, and he held her eyes in a manner that suggested he had wrestled with this moment long before sending the note. "Then may I inquire as to why I have been asked here?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. He exhaled softly, as if deciding something. "Because I owe you an explanation. And perhaps," he added after a pause, "because I owe myself one." She waited, uncertain if she should stand or sit, but he gestured toward a chair near the fire. She accepted with careful grace, folding her hands in her lap while he remained standing, pacing slowly, as though seeking the correct beginning to a confession he had avoided making to anyone else. "For weeks," he began, "I have existed in a state I can scarcely articulate. The estate thrives, the staff does their duties, the world expects constancy from me, but I have felt as though I were carved of stone, unable to feel anything beyond a kind of quiet decay." He paused, then looked at her with an honest weight. "Until the moment your son found me." Evelyn's breath caught. The image of that morning, the child's innocent words, flashed through her mind. "My son meant only kindness, Your Grace," she said. "He is far too tender-hearted for his own good." "It was kindness," the Duke replied, "of a kind I had forgotten existed." He crossed to the window, his voice quieting. To be offered comfort without expectation, without calculation, it unsettled me. Not for the offense it caused, for it caused none, but because it revealed how long I have lived without such warmth. His admission tightened something inside her chest, not pity, but recognition. She understood that kind of emptiness. He turned back to her. "I do not know if you realize the impact of your presence, Miss Haraway. You carry yourself with a composure I have rarely witnessed, and yet I sense the shadows you've had to overcome. Your dignity, it demands respect." Her cheeks warmed. though she kept her posture firm. "I am merely attempting to raise my son with integrity, Your Grace. The world is not gentle with governesses, nor with widows." His expression shifted subtly. "Your husband, was he the one who caused the heaviness I see in your eyes?" She hesitated. She had not expected such a direct question. Not from a duke. Not in this place. Not at this hour. But the concern in his voice was neither prying nor improper. It was sincere. "My marriage was not unkind," she admitted, choosing her words with care, but it was marked by silence. "My late husband valued order and obedience, not conversation or companionship. When he passed, I mourned him, but I also mourned the years I lived unseen." The Duke's eyes softened with something she did not dare name. "To live unseen," he murmured, "is a cruelty no heart should endure." She looked down at her clasped hands. "It teaches one to survive without expecting anything more." He came closer, stopping only a few steps from her. The closeness felt daring, but not suffocating. It was as though he feared to approach further without permission he could not bring himself to request. "Miss Haraway," he said quietly, "I have not asked you here to overstep propriety, nor do I intend to place you in a compromising position. I summoned you because I wished, for the first time in many years, to speak honestly with someone who listens." His voice, though controlled, carried an undertone of vulnerability that unsettled her far more than any impropriety could. "And what do you wish me to hear, Your Grace?" she asked. "That I am not the man society speaks of," he said, the words emerging with a restrained intensity. "They say I am cold, unreachable, unfeeling, but the truth is far less flattering. I have lived in fear of offering my heart again only to lose it." Evelyn's breath stilled. He continued, each sentence woven with painful truth. "I returned from the war injured, widowed, and half a ghost. My late wife was gentle, but I hid my grief behind duty, and the world praised me for endurance while I withered in silence. When your son spoke to me, I felt something stir that I had believed long dead." Silence stretched between them, warm and fragile. She realized then that he was not seeking validation. He was seeking understanding. "Your Grace," she said softly, "I cannot pretend to grasp the burdens you carry, but I do believe this. Your grief does not make you broken. It makes you human." A flicker of relief passed across his features, subtle yet unmistakable. He stepped closer, slow enough to offer her the opportunity to retreat. She did not. "When I repaired your son's toy," he confessed, "it was not for the sake of charity. It was because I wanted to give back a small piece of joy that he gave me without knowing." She felt her heart tremble at the sincerity of the gesture. "And when I caught you on the staircase," he continued, his voice dropping, "I did not act from obligation. I acted because the thought of you falling was unbearable." Her pulse quickened. It was an admission cloaked in restraint yet throbbing with meaning. Before she could reply, a sudden knock shattered the charged stillness. The door burst open without waiting for permission. The Duchess Dowager swept into the room like a winter storm, her expression thunderous the moment she saw Evelyn seated near the fire with her son's employer standing far too close. "Adrian," she hissed, "what is the meaning of this?" Evelyn rose instantly, mortified, but the Duchess turned her cold fury upon her. "You dare meet alone with the Duke at such an hour? Have you no sense of station? No propriety?" The Duke's face darkened with a rare flash of anger. "Mother," he warned, "you will lower your voice." But the Duchess's glare cut through the room, like sharpened glass. "This woman will not bring scandal upon this house." Evelyn's heart plunged. She clasped her hands tightly, fighting the instinctive panic rising in her throat. The Duke stepped between them, protective and unyielding. "Enough," he said, voice low and dangerous. "You will not address her in such a manner." The Duchess's eyes widened in shock, perhaps the first sign that she realized the depth of his conviction. For a suspended second, the air crackled with unspoken conflict. Then the Duchess turned sharply toward Evelyn. "You will leave this room at once." Evelyn bowed her head, the tremble in her breath betraying the storm within her. She walked toward the door with careful dignity, though her knees felt weak. As she slipped into the corridor, she heard the Duke's voice behind her, quiet, firm, and resolute. "Mother, we must speak." The door closed, and Evelyn found herself alone in the dim hallway, unsure whether the moment she had just shared with the Duke would lead to devastation, or to a future she dared not imagine. The following morning unfolded beneath a muted sky, the kind of pale, indecisive light that could not decide whether to bless the estate with warmth or keep it suspended in chill. Eleanor left her chamber earlier than expected, compelled by a need she could neither name nor dismiss. The manor felt heavier than the day before, as though the very walls had overheard the Duke's private turmoil and absorbed it into their stones. She moved quietly, determined not to disturb the children or the servants, yet unable to resist the pull toward the old gallery, where so many of the Duke's family portraits hung. She had not walked that wing since her arrival. It had seemed presumptuous, almost intrusive, to study the faces of his ancestors when she had yet to earn a place among them. But the events of the previous night, the Duke's guarded expression, the unspoken suspicion shadowing his every word, the subtle yet unmistakable withdrawal, had stirred a need to understand the man behind the title. If she could not earn his trust directly, perhaps she could learn who he had been before the wounds that had shaped him. And if she understood those wounds, perhaps she could avoid deepening them. Her footsteps echoed softly as she entered the long corridor. Dust motes drifted in the pale light, drifting like forgotten memories. Portrait after portrait towered above her, stern men in hunting attire, women with composed smiles and elaborate gowns, children posed with meticulous formality. There was a grandeur to the collection that felt almost oppressive, as though generations of Harrowhearts looked down upon her with a silent interrogation. "Who are you to stand among us?" Eleanor paused before a portrait of a woman with chestnut hair, her expression serene but unmistakably strong-willed. The plaque beneath read, "Lady Margaret Harrowheart, Duchess, 1812. She leaned in, studying the features, and for a moment she searched for traces of the Duke's face in hers. The high cheekbones matched, as did the measured composure. Yet what struck Eleanor most was the woman's eyes, clear, steady, and resolved, as though she had endured storms difficult to name. "You favor her," a quiet voice murmured behind her. She turned swiftly. Lady Isolde stood a few paces away, her hands folded neatly before her, her posture as impeccable as ever. Eleanor tried to mask her surprise, though she suspected the governess noticed it nonetheless. "In spirit, perhaps," Isolde continued. "Not in appearance, but in the manner of carrying your burdens in silence." The remark was disarming, and Eleanor struggled to discern whether it held sympathy or criticism. "I was not aware you made a habit of observing me so closely. It is my responsibility to observe all who come into the children's lives." Isolde stepped closer, her tone still neutral. "And you, in particular, will influence far more than their daily routines." Eleanor braced herself. She had always suspected the governess's quiet scrutiny hid deeper convictions. But instead of admonishment, Isolde surprised her. "You should know," she said. "The Duke is not as inscrutable as he wishes to appear. His doubts are not rooted in you, but in what has been done to him." Eleanor exhaled slowly. "I am painfully aware of his reticence, yet I cannot remedy what he will not share." "He has lost much," Isolde said gently. "His first wife's death wounded him, yes, but betrayal, true betrayal, drove the blade deeper. Until he is convinced you do not carry the same potential to harm, he will remain wary." "I have no desire to harm him," Eleanor insisted, "but I cannot prove a negative. I cannot prove I will not betray him." "Then prove your constancy," Isolde replied, "not through grand gestures, but through presence, reliability. The Duke has learned to mistrust words, but he does understand actions." Eleanor considered this, though it felt both reasonable and insufficient. "And what of the children?" she asked. "Do they require the same?" "The children need something far simpler," Isolde said. "They need gentleness. They have known loss, but not the kind that hardens. They merely seek affection freely given." A faint warmth broke through the morning's heaviness. This, at least, Eleanor knew she could offer without hesitation. "Then I shall begin with them," she said quietly. Isolde studied her for a moment, then inclined her head. A wise beginning. The governess withdrew as silently as she had arrived, leaving Eleanor alone once more in the watching corridor. Yet the solitude no longer felt oppressive. She understood now that the Duke's hesitation was not a personal indictment, but a scar he had yet to overcome. And she knew, if she was honest with herself, that her own fears had fed into the distance between them. She had been so cautious, so determined not to misstep, that she had inadvertently reinforced the very barrier she wished to dismantle. Resolved, she turned toward the nursery. She found the children seated on the rug, arranging small wooden figurines in a half-imagined battlefield. Oliver looked up first, his face brightening. "Miss Eleanor, we were just deciding which knight wins the duel." "That depends," she said, lowering herself to their level. "What are they fighting for?" "For honor," Amelia declared, "and because the Black Knight said something terrible about the White Knight's sister." "Well," Eleanor replied, "then I believe the White Knight deserves a fair chance to defend her." The children laughed, eager to hand her the figurine. As she joined their game, she noticed Oliver glancing at her with a quiet expectancy, one that felt strangely fragile. She offered him a reassuring smile, and his shoulders eased. When the Duke appeared at the doorway later, he paused. Eleanor did not see him at first. She was too preoccupied mediating a dispute between a wooden dragon and the beleaguered knights. But when she finally looked up, something flickered across his expression, surprise, softened by something else she could not easily name. He stepped inside, slow and controlled, as though unsure whether he was intruding. "I see you have conquered the battlefield," he said. "Only partially," Eleanor replied. "It seems honor is more complicated than I anticipated." Amelia tugged eagerly at her father's sleeve. "Papa, Miss Eleanor says the White Knight protected his sister because he loves her." The Duke hesitated, his gaze flicking between the children and Eleanor. Something in him shifted, subtle but unmistakable. "Then Miss Eleanor understands him well," he said. It was not acceptance, nor reconciliation, but it was the closest he had come to trust since her arrival. And it was enough for now. As the children resumed their play, Eleanor stood, meeting the Duke's eyes steadily. For the first time, he did not look away. A question hung between them, unspoken but undeniable. He broke the silence first. "If you have time later," he said, "I would speak with you." Eleanor nodded, her pulse quickening. "Of course." He inclined his head and withdrew, leaving her standing in the quiet after his departure. She felt no triumph, no certainty, only the cautious hope of a bridge beginning to form where a chasm had once stood. And though she could not yet see where it led, she knew she would walk it, step by careful step,